highlights of 60 years of ministry. So if anyone ever tells you that all the dinosaurs are dead, you tell them that they're completely wrong. You saw one taking a meeting here tonight. The highlight for me of those early years of our ministry was indeed Mission 72. But it had great significance for me because in those years, the first large city mission I was connected with was in 1956 in Perth with Pastor George Burnside. Thousands came to this great tent mission there on the Esplanade of Perth. All Pastor Burnside had to do basically was to put an ad in the newspaper, and of all subjects he would put heaven, and thousands would come. And as a result, we baptised numbers that ran into the hundreds. But with the 1960s, things began to change. And as a result of that, the baptisms went down in the division, and so it was decided that they would launch Mission 72. And so 1971 was declared a year of preparation and prayer. Let me tell you, if you are going to win souls, you have to first of all do it on your knees. Well, April 16, 1972 was what was called E-Day, or Evangelism Day, and there were 800 churches that opened their doors and began a campaign. I was in the South Australian Conference at the time. I had 4 departments to care for, and also a large city church, the Trinity Gardens Church. But we rallied the church and the young people, and we all got working. No longer could we just sort of sit back and let an evangelist do the work. It was a matter of everybody being involved. And as a result of that, there in Trinity Gardens, we baptised a nice group of people and a nice group of young people too. 2 of those young people went into ministry. One is now the head of ADRA in the world field, and the other is a secretary of one of our large conferences. You know, one of the great things of being a dinosaur is you can live long enough to see some of the fruitage of your labours. I used to often think we'd have to wait till we got to heaven to do that, but it's a great thrill. And that's what soul winning is all about. Well, I used to take the service one Sabbath in Trinity Gardens, and the other Sabbath as a departmental director I would be itinerating. And I went down to one of our southern Adelaide churches, and I took a subject on Orion, my favourite subject, you know, Christ coming back through Orion. And some of the young folks there, you see, once Mission 72 got rolling, everybody started to get excited. And so some of these young people there at this church, they said to me, look, Morfett Vale, they said, we would like you to come on a weeknight and share what you have said with some of our hippie friends. So I drove all the way down, and we had a study. I had a blackboard and chalk in those days, and we had the chalk dust flying and trying to draw, you know, the nebula of Orion and so forth. And these hippies, they got excited. And so I went down for about 3 nights, and we established the studies, and then the local pastor took over, and he did a tremendous job of that group. I think there was somewhere between 15 and 20 of these hippies that were baptised. Some of them, even today, are still in the ministry. So this is what was happening in Mission 72. And when the Spirit of God is moving and people are working and people are praying, miracles take place. And so this is the results as they were put up on the as they were reported in the record after this was the October record, and they mention here about how it had been a blessing to the church members, backsliders have been reclaimed, thousands heard the message, ministry was greatly benefited, only eternity would reveal the full results of Mission 72. But what we learnt then, for me, it lived with me. And so I endeavoured in my ministry to inculcate these particular principles. And after I was in departmental work for 14 years, I asked to go back, I shouldn't say go back, but to be a church pastor. There was nothing I ever loved more than being a church pastor where the rubber meets the road. And so I was given the Waitara Church, and I endeavoured to work through, involve all the church members. And we had the seed sowing preparation with these particular points here. And then came a reaping campaign with the evangelists. And so, as a result, here in the Waitara Church, and I was only there for 16 years, and then Pastor Jeff Yulden followed me, and the program kept moving, and we baptised, 330 souls at that from 1985 to 2005. I tell you what, the principles of Mission 72 work. And once again, when the Spirit is poured out, miracles take place. We went letterboxing, and there was a 8-year-old girl that got a Try Jesus card, and as a result of that, it resulted in her family being one. They won another South African family, and these folks then won people around Australia as well as in their homeland in Africa. Actually, I even went and flew across to Pretoria and baptised some of the family over there. Altogether, about the last count, there have been over 30 people baptised now as a result of that one letterbox card. And then came the baptism of Sandy. Now, you've seen Sandy here. Sandy goes to every AYC, but she was part of the miracles. And I'll never forget, I had baptised Sandy's mother, and Sandy was very, very upset. In fact, she went to a high school teacher, a friend of hers by the name of Cheryl, and she said, "Look, my mother has gone bananas. She's keeping Sunday on Saturday." And this lady looked at her and she said, "Sandy, I think they're right." What had happened was that Cheryl's cousin had become an Adventist and had told her about the Sabbath, and the Lord, trying to help Cheryl, performed a miracle there. And so Cheryl said to Sandy, "Sandy, I had a Sabbath-keeping spider in my backyard." And Sandy looked. She said, "Yes." She said, "Every night the spider would spin a web, and I'd have to break it as I went down to the woodshed or down the back. And but," she said, "that spider never spun a web on Saturday morning. It kept the Sabbath." So I got so excited, I couldn't wait to get back to Waitara and tell my saints. And when I told them the story, they just rolled their eyes and said, "The old pastor's getting old. We think he's lost it." And I'm saying, "Lord, I thought all my members were ready for translation and they can't even accept a miracle." Well, when Sandy was baptised, Cheryl came, and I made sure that I had her sitting up the front, and when we introduced Sandy with the baptism, then I asked Cheryl if she'd come up and tell the story. And this very elegant lady came up. She had a fur coat on, and she was, she could speak beautifully, being a high school teacher. And she got up and she told the story of the Sabbath-keeping spider. I looked down at my congregation and I felt like saying, there. Don't limit God when he begins to perform miracles. And when you see Sandy up here singing, those miracles go on. I don't think Sandy's hardly ever missed AYC. Well, the public reaping campaigns. We as a church, we would work and then we'd call in these particular folk. And these were the folk that we actually had an order. And then the Waitara youth, led by Neil Schofield and Charissa Fong. Well, these were some of the youth missions. And the person who was looking after the young people and encouraging them with these particular missions was Neil Schofield. And Neil did a great job. He was not only my senior elder, but also he was the youth leader as well. And so they ran a mission in the Sydney Sand, in one of the lecture halls there. They put handbills around the place and visited and so forth. And as a result, this wonderful family was baptised. I can still remember the thrill of having Dr. Remy and Angie in my pastor's class, but I retired before I had the privilege of baptising them. Well, the youth were trained. And so here was Charissa Fong. She was just a secondary student. Poor Charissa, her mother brought her to Waitara Church at the age of 3, and she then suffered me as her pastor for the next 16 years. But anyhow, it was a thrill to see her trained. And Neil Schofield, he said to Charissa, now look, I will give you copies of my sermons. Then you get them and put them into your own words, use your own illustrations, and this is what Charissa did. And what I'm saying to you young people is this: you just get copies of sermons from anyone, and nothing is original. Get them and then make them your own, and you preach them, and God will bless, as he certainly blessed Charissa. And as a result, Charissa's first mission had 32 decisions for baptism. Can't you say praise God for that? Okay. Well, then reclaiming people. Joy was a Filipino, and she had gone to Mountain View College. Her relations on both sides were Adventist ministers, but Joy rebelled. And as Joy said later, you name it, I did it. And so she took off for Australia in her rebellion, and she said to the folks before she left, to her mother and father, I will go to Australia and I'll make sure I don't marry a Seventh-day Adventist, leaving them all behind. Well, that was all very nice, but and she married Dennis, and he was not a Seventh-day Adventist. They lived at Manly, and then they moved over to Waitara, and we went on our visitation program. And I'll never forget this particular day, this Sabbath afternoon, and I had the person in charge of the visitation was an ex-Jehovah's Witness. You know, you can't get a better person to organise your door-to-door work than an ex-JW. I baptised over 200 of them, and they're great. They're wonderful. Anyhow, so this particular day I said to the folks, hands up those who would like to go door knocking. Not everyone wants to go door knocking. Some folks don't mind going popping things in letterboxes. It's a matter of everybody working in a way that they are comfortable. But up went the hand of Alan. Now, Alan was 40 years old. He was a big boy, but he was a handicapped boy. But a more sincere person you would never get. But I thought to myself, well, if he goes around from door to door, it might give the folks a wrong impression because his handicap also included a very, very bad stutter. And I was just about to say, look, Alan, will you stay home here in the church and fold papers? And then it almost seemed as if a voice was saying to me, who do you think you are to decide who works for me? You know, sometimes the Lord's got to get us pastors to just elbow us out of the way when the Spirit is moving. And so I was looking a little bit bewildered, and this ex-JW, he looked at me, he knew what was happening. He said, Pastor, don't you worry, I'll take him, I'll educate him at the first couple of doors, and then he can go and I'll go, and we'll leapfrog, I'll do the house next door, and I'll look after him. So they took off, and there Alan knocked at this door. And there he was, and who opened the door? But Dennis. He opened it just that way. And he heard Alan stutter. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. And he thought, oh, my wife Joy used to be an Adventist. Oh, and he thought there was something sincere about this fellow that he felt he couldn't just, move him on. So he said, well, would you like to come in? He said, my wife used to be an Adventist, and Joy's behind the door saying, no, I don't want to see any Adventists. And Dennis had this naughty grin on his face. And Alan came in and he looked at them. And he said, we've got a wonderful church and we've got a wonderful pastor. I had him as a deacon, and he was the most faithful deacon we had. And, it's nice to have, a fan club. Mine fit into a telephone box, but Alan would be the first. And so Alan said, would you like to meet our pastor? And they said they didn't have the heart to say no to him. He was his mental capacity was about a 10 or an 11-year-old boy. And so they said, yes. So Alan came back, he said, oh, Pastor, quick, I've opened up a home. You come and meet them. So I went there and I prayed, and I thought, how can I, what do I do now? And suddenly the thought came into my mind. I said, Dennis, if your wife has been an Adventist, she must have some hang-ups. When you go out to a restaurant, do you ever find that she doesn't eat certain things like crabs or prawns or shellfish or pig or something like that? Yeah, he said. Well, I said, I'll tell you what, next Monday night I'll come and I'll tell you what Adventists believe, and that'll give you an idea of what your problems. Oh, yes, he said, that'll be okay. So I went and took my charts and everything else along, and 8:30 I said, oh, sorry, I'm only halfway through, but I'll come back next week. And then next week I said, oh, I still haven't got through. By this time, Dennis was beginning to warm up, and we had studies. At the end of the year, they were baptised, and they made their way back to the Philippines. And I said to them, have you told your parents? Oh no, they said they've got no idea that we're even attending church, let alone baptised. And so Friday night came, all the relations came in, they were up at Mountain View College, and they gathered around, and then Joy said, now you Adventists, it's Friday night, this is your Sabbath, you better go home. And they thought, this is our wildcat come home. And then she said, Dennis has been baptised. Oh, they said, that's nice. Into what church were you baptised, Dennis? And when he said Adventist, wow, then the tears began to flow. And when they composed themselves with hugs and the rest of it, then the next thing is Dennis up and says, yes, and Joy was baptised with me. Well, they reckon you could have paddled home on the tears. 3 months later, Joy's mum came to Australia. She said, I've got to see Alan. And I will never forget seeing this mother. And she wrapped her arms around that big Hulk. And she looked up into his eyes and she said, Alan, you have done something that nobody else could have done. If this person hadn't have been handicapped, Dennis would have closed the door. And as a result, God had used him in a special way. Young people, if God could use Alan like that, there's none of us without an excuse. And just to finish off with, here, each has his place in the eternal plan of heaven. Each is to work in cooperation with Christ for the salvation of souls. Not more surely is the place prepared for us in the heavenly mansions than is the place designated on earth where we are to work for God. And if you want to be happy, you accept that place and work for God. And I can say 60 years later, it's still a thrill. God bless you.